So this is their bottling stuff. They had a whole bunch of old equipment over here, but it looks like they moved all that out and moved in the church pew. Big ass fan. I love those.
Normally we start the tour down here. We're going to go straight upstairs and start it in the still room. However, I'm waiting to see if you can hear my voice. I think you can. This is our bottling line. All bottling is done on this line down here. The only thing we don't bottle here in-house is the Mary Hyde Bowman Caramel Bourbon Cream. It has real cream in it, so it has to be done in a refrigerated line in order to make it shelf stable. So it's done in an assisted distillery up in Lewiston, Maine. They take our 4-year-old bourbon and blend it with the caramel and the cream and the other ingredients. So if you do purchase that product today, after you open it, it does need to be refrigerated. It'll keep for 6 to 12 months, and I guarantee at least 25% of you are going to leave with a bottle of that today. All right, there is a little step as you step in. Please be aware. There you go. Catch anybody in case they fall. It hasn't happened yet. We'll step down.
Thank you, sir.
Step.
Thank you.
This is their Vendome. That's their newest one. This was the original one over here. I might ask them a question, but I wanted to know why they were taking their temperature at that point right there and not higher.
Oh, that's a good picture over there by the barrels.
Everyone made it up here? Check us out. That's good. It's all time. All right. First off, I'm David. Thank you for coming in today. It's kind of busy down here. If you have any questions throughout the tour, don't hesitate to ask. We only have a limited amount of time to bring you through this. So most of the stuff we're going to cover is at a high level. If you want me to drill into it, you need to ask questions, okay? Whether it's now or at the end of the tour, I'll be happy to answer. I'm going to start off here talking about A. Smith Bowman. Bowman family, very deep roots here in Virginia. Started back in the mid-1700s. John, Joseph, Isaac, and Abraham, all born out in Strasburg, Virginia. All 4 of them served with the Virginia militia, which led them to serve during the Revolutionary War. One thing about that conflict was is we didn't have a government structure in place, and the soldiers weren't getting paid anything, very little of anything. So after the conflict was over, the government, in order to compensate them, was giving out land grants on the frontier. They could get between 1,000 and 4,000 acres of land. They just had to agree to plant 40 acres of crop. The brothers took them up on that. Back in those days, the frontier is the area we now call Kentucky. So they helped sell that area. In fact, the original airport in Louisville was Bowman Field, named after their family. All right, for our purposes, we jump ahead a couple of generations. A. Smith, he's the gentleman that eventually started our distillery. He was born in 1868. He got into the distilling business in the early 1900s, working at the Algiers Distillery in New Orleans. He made his way to vice president, the president of the distillery, running the whole show. Everything was going pretty well career-wise until 1919, when the government came up with something called the Volstead Act, which began prohibition in January of 1920. One of the rules of the Volstead Act is they allowed for 10 distilling licenses for distilleries to remain open throughout prohibition to sell whiskey. That business model was so bad that only 6 of the 10 licenses were ever used. There was no distilling done during the prohibition years legally anyways. They were selling off what was already in the warehouses and the rick houses during that time period. On the other side of the economic equation, we do know many physicians became very wealthy writing those alcohol prescriptions. In fact, we have a copy of one I pulled off the internet, and on the bottom of it, in bold letters, it states, no refills. So they had to pay that occupancy fee every time they wanted their pint of whiskey. You could go in every 10 days and get a pint of whiskey, rum, or brandy. It was your choice. So they did well on that. So A. Smith's going to start over in 1920. He chose to move to Indianapolis, Indiana, where he started a couple businesses. The main one was a bus company called People's Bus Company. He grew it to 40 buses. Then in 1927, the railroad saw if they're going to stay economically advisable, stay in business, they're going to have to spread out a little bit on what they were doing. So they're going around trying to buy the bus company. So he did sell it to one of the railroads for $500,000 in 1927. Wow. His timing was good. We're about 18 months away from the Great Depression beginning. So he had his oldest son at that time start looking around for a farm. He wanted to try the cattle and grain business again. He had tried it in the late 1800s, and they had some hailstones come through that wiped the crops out. So it didn't go well. It's the only thing he had been successful. So fortunately for us, they found Sunset Hills Farms in Fairfax County, Virginia. The original purchase in 1927 was 3,200 acres, and they purchased that for $176,000. You believe that? You can get a half acre land up there now, right? So they got up and running. Things were going well with cattle and grain business. Then in December 5th of 1933, the government finally put everything in place to reverse that constitutional amendment that brought up prohibition. So it ended in January 1934. At that point, the federal government decided they weren't going to have anything to do with spirits anymore. They didn't want to. They said, states, we're done. You figure it out. And that's why we have so many different laws across our country on different things that you can do. Every state's a little bit different. When you go from state to state, you may have experienced that when you're traveling. In our case, there's 13 remaining control states. What a control state is, it means the state controls the distribution or the retailing or both of spirits in the state. Well, here in Virginia, fortunately, we're one of the ones that has both distribution and retail. Makes for a, well, I'll just leave it at that. The other thing they established afterwards was that they established a three-tier system that they put on the industry, which was pretty unique as far as business goes. But they stated that you could be a distiller, you could be a distributor, or you could be a retailer. You cannot be a combination of any three. So what you see down there, where we have the alcohol down there that we sell, is ABC store number 91 in the state of Virginia. It's the best bargain the state has out there. They have absolutely no overhead. We sell the product for them, and they pay us a small commission. That's how it's done. However, there was some good news just yesterday. There was a press release out that we're finally getting on par with the wine industry. Hopefully by July, if the government signs the bill, we'll be able to ship our product interstate. So if you live within the state of Virginia, we'll be able to ship the product. The wineries have had it for 6 to 8 years already. We didn't. We didn't think it would get through, but it actually went through 40-0 in the state senate. It's going to go through the other bodies in the government side. But pretty hopeful for that. All right, back on track. So A. Smith applied for and received the first distiller's license here in Virginia in 1934. Him and his sons distilled their first bourbons in 1935. Sold his first in 37. Right after, the cattle and grain business did very well during World War II with the shortages and such. So immediately after the conflict, they were able to add an additional 4,000 acres land to the original farm, increasing the land holdings to 7,200 acres. Then in 1954, A. Smith passed away in the early 90s, and his two sons continued the business on as is until 1960, when amongst themselves and the rest of the family, they made the decision to exit the cattle and grain business. So they sold all the land but 65 acres to Mr. Robert E. Simon. Mr. Simon was a real estate developer. Mr. Simon was an architect. What Mr. Simon wasn't was modest. He named Reston, Virginia after himself. Robert E. Simon Tunn, that's where the name comes from. So if you look at the city of Reston on the map of Virginia, you're going to find it's approximately 7,200 acres. That's where the original farm is. Wow. So they continued distilling up there for about 25 acres of the land until the early 1980s, when the third generation was in charge of the business, which was J. Adams. Jay was the son-in-law, or is, he's still alive, son-in-law of A. Smith. Jay identified if they were going to stay in business as a distillery, they were going to have to move. The cost of running a distillery, what had become a bedroom community in DC, was getting very high. But probably more importantly, something called NIMBY, not my backyard. The neighbors didn't want it. There's a lot of pressure there. So they knew they're going to have to move. So Jay found this group of buildings down here in the early 1980s. This group of buildings, we'll jump back real quick, early 1920s, started by what was known as the Sylvania Industrial Company, transitioned to FMC. What it was in its day was the world's largest cellophane plant. There was over 1 million square feet of manufacturing space here. They were the largest employer in the Fredericksburg area, of between 2,600 and 3,400 employees, right up until the 70s. Then they paid an above average wage, so this is the job the kids coming out of school that didn't go to military college wanted to get. Many of them were able to successfully raise their families and retire from the plant. Jump ahead to mid-1970s, a lot of advances made in plastics. Plastics made out of petrochemicals. They come up with a substitute for the cellophane. They can make it a lot cheaper than the cellophane, which is cellulose, which is trees. So by 78, it didn't work anymore, and they shut the plant down. So the whole thing was vacant here in the early 80s when Spotsylvania County was building out a sewage system. They needed a water treatment plant. Well, back in 1972, the country passed major legislation as far as the Clean Water Act go. Still the heyday for FMC, so they were forced to build a state-of-the-art water treatment plant back here on the river. County needs a treatment plant. They built a second one to buy the entire complex. Bought the entire complex. If you look at the news articles in those days, a lot of the citizens weren't happy. They spent $6 million buying the entire complex. In hindsight, it was an excellent value. They're still operating that plant back there. They're talking about replacing it now, but the price tag I saw was between $100 and $150 million to build a new one. So they did well. Where this ties in, Jay negotiates with the county, buys the north 25 acres and 12 buildings in 1985. They spent a little over 2 years retrofitting it, remodeling it into the distillery. They distilled their first spirits here in 1988. Now, part of the move down here encompassed moving 26,000 barrels of aged bourbon down from the warehouses in Fairfax County. It took 4 months, 4 tractor trailers to get it all down. There's a newspaper articles from the early 90s referencing that by saying, in fact, they had so much bourbon they didn't have to do any until 1990. And I thought, yeah, Jay just spent $5 million moving the distillery. He was just getting his capital back. That's the fun move down. Anyways, all right, back onto the Bowmans. The Bowman business model is far different than what ours is today. The way they made money is they sold a lot of cases of spirits throughout our country and the world at one time. And what the industry describes as the value segment, which meant the bottles, chances are, were going to come off the bottom shelves. Sometimes they were plastic, but they're always an excellent value. The 175 liter vodka in the 70s and 80s, very popular on college campuses. You could get a handle for less than $10. Don't ask me how I know that. Sold a lot of it. That's how they made their money. Then in 2003, the Bowmans made the decision to retire from the distilling business. And that's when they sold us through another American family that still owns us now. The first 4 years, they went on, they bought other distilleries afterwards. The first 4 years, they continued on with the same business model here. Then the decision was made, they weren't going to do that here anymore, so they moved the production of the value price spirits to other distillers they had bought along with plastic bottling lines. And that's when they rebranded us as what we're known now, A. Smith Bowman. So if you hear us talk about it, we don't call ourselves Bowman, we call ourselves A. Smith. We need to distinguish from those days. Because now we concentrate on the quality of our products, much more on the premium end, but also the Pioneer Spirits doesn't relate strictly back to our roots in the 1700s. It's what we're doing now. We do a lot of experimentals for ourselves and also our parent company. We'll talk about a few of those momentarily. Any questions so far? All right, products, 3 bourbons. We have our small batch, we have, which is 12 to 15 barrels that we're batching together. We batch that together, so the flavor profile is today will be the same in 6 months or 3 years from now, very similar. Then we have the John Jay, which is our premium single barrel product. Single barrel means just that. When we're bottling that, Jimmy, our distiller, who just hit October 12th, 30 years here, he'll dump that barrel, he puts it to 100 stainless steel lines down to that bottling line. They'll get between 150 and 180 bottles out of that barrel. When they get down the end, they actually blow air through the line to get the last 4 or 5 bottles out and start another barrel. Each time you buy the John Jay, the flavor profile can be a little bit different. But one thing I want to tell you right now is all of our bourbons start with the same white dog and the same mash going into the still. How they end up depends on how long we age them for, how we finish them. So in the case of the John, that is aged approximately 10 years. The small batch is about 7. Our third bourbon is the Isaac Bowman. That's our latest bourbon. We started bottling that in November 2017. I mentioned our experimentals as far as Pioneer Spirits. We have the Abraham Bowman line, which is our experimental whiskeys. We've done 19 expressions in 11 years. Yes.
So what does Pioneer Spirits mean?
Pioneer Spirits reflects our deep roots here in the state of Virginia, but also developing new products, pioneering new for ourselves and the rest of the company. Abraham Bowman, highly collectible. 3 years ago, you could get it in ABC stores. Now you're going to be here by about 10:30 on the day we release it. You'll never get your hands on it. The last one we released we did was the Saturday before Christmas, right? December, right? Cold. You figure you would get a lot of people. 10 o'clock in the morning, we got 700 people lined up for those bottles.
Wow.
Okay? They were all paid for by 11:40 that morning. We can't sell them until 10 o'clock. So in an hour and 40 minutes, we went through over 800 bottles. Highly collectible. So going back to 2016, it was made out of copper because when you distill this copper the sulfites in there, they're actually considered sacrificial because some of that sulfites will bind with copper. So over time, they do thin out. Mary was custom made by the Ben Dome Company over 35 years ago for the Bowman. Now,
Why do you call it Mary?
well, that's Mary and that's George. We got to be polite. That's the mother and father of the Bowman family, matriarch and patriarch from the 1700s. Good question. Don't trust a distillery that doesn't name their stills. Remember that.
Okay.
All right. So Mary there, she was custom made by them. She's a passive reflux pot still. Now, one of the customizations of Mary is the copper pot still there. You have the large ball and the copper coil above it. There's only 4 stills that we know of that are ever made with that configuration. What that does is it generates additional reflex. Normally on a pot still, you have a small ball with a horn shape that comes up, kicks down, and launches dog legs. That there, what reflux is, when you start heating up that mash mix, you create steam distillate, let the alcohol vapors evaporate. They rise up, they hit the ball and the coil above it. And that's going to, some of that's going to condense back into a liquid. So if Mary was running right now, we've got a window in the side of her, it looks like rain falling down. We feel what that does is it gives us a different flavor profile than the other bourbons out there. Just about every review you'll find on our bourbon, somewhere in that review will be the word smooth, whether they care for it over or not. Either way. But also changes the flavor profile from the other bourbons. The other thing we do differently is we distill our bourbon a 3rd time. Most scotches and bourbons in the world are only distilled, 95% of them are only distilled twice. Okay? It gives us a different flavor. So what does the reflux? It's going to carry through the rest of that copper pipe you see there into that large copper pipe in the back of the platform. That's a tube-in-tube structure that works as a condenser. And what that means is we have pockets copper tubing and then we run cold water through it. So that steam distillate hits it, it condenses into what we call white dog. We're kind of a big group here, so I'm going to keep talking as we do this, but there's a hands-on that I love to do, and we're going to do it anyway, so even though it takes a little bit. Just take the bottle, put it against your hand, tilt it back. You don't want to pour it into your hand, it will go all over the place. So you need about that much to do this. Then you're going to take your hand, and you're going to rub it together. On that first rub, you're going to pick up alcohol. On the second rub, it changes drastically. What do you smell on the second rub? Corn. Smell the grain. Drops the grain. You get a 3rd rub in there. It'll change one more time. You'll actually pick up on some of the yeast. It's a little fun thing you do there. You'll also notice that when you do that, the palms of your hands are going to feel silky. There's not only alcohol in there, there's oils in there from the grain. And that's what softens your skin on your hands. And the other good thing is, if you choose to do this, your palms are officially sanitized for the next one, because it is. We just malt whiskey. If you make malt whiskey in Scotland, you call it Scotch. Okay, you make it over here, you got to call it malt whiskey. I mentioned before that most Scotches are in a aged in a used American bourbon barrel. Well, to straight Scotch, it has to be like Beth says, it has to be a new barrel. So those are Hungarian oak barrels. They're a little bit bigger than the white oak next to it there. It's cousins. They're approximately 60 gallons. And so that's come back in 6 or 7 years. We'll let you know how that one is. I just did it. This one over here, the vanilla written on the outside of these barrels. This barrel, what's different than the white oak, it's an American oak from Minnesota. Different char on that barrel. And I believe this barrel here had no char on, just a heavy toast. So it's something that we're doing differently. The thought at the time was we thought it would have more vanilla notes by using the different barrels. And it did. Brian tried it back in August, definitely more vanilla, but he wants to let it age a few more years. Over here, vanilla and spice, French oak barrel. French oak, very expensive. I've seen anywhere between $600 and $800 a barrel compared to $150 for a white oak barrel. Okay. The reason we have this up here is to point out the oak have a big flavor of the wood, a big difference in how the product tastes. All the grain patterns, depending on what species of oak you use, are tighter or looser. When they passed law in '64, they said you had to age it in a new charred oak container. They didn't specify what species of oak. There's over 300 species of oak out there, so a lot of people trying different things. This barrel down here is kind of a fun barrel. It's one of the few in this facility here. The first use wasn't for bourbon. Its first use was to age hot sauces in. They age hot sauces in them down in Louisiana between 12 to 24 months from what I read. After we're done aging the hot sauce in that particular barrel, they sent it up here. And they filled it up with bourbon and they let it age for 3 years. And Jimmy, our distiller, tried it, and the master distiller at the time was Truman Cost. Well, folks, let me take a sip of water first. They both came to the same conclusion. They hoped another human being never had to try it again. It was horrible. They made a lot of mistakes. They didn't rinse it enough, and there's a chunk floating around there. It just came down right there. To this day, you ask Jimmy about it, he'll look at you and you'll see his eyes start twitching as he starts talking about it. So when Brian came on board, I'm sure Jimmy wanted to get rid of that barrel. He told Brian what it was about. He goes, "Why don't we just dump it?" Brian said, "You know what, Jimmy? Not to torment you, but we're going to keep it around for a couple of reasons. Number one, to remind us you can learn a lot from your mistakes and failures. Just don't make them again. But more importantly, as part of our business statement and mission is, we recognize the best bourbon ever hasn't been made yet. We also recognize the only way to achieve that is to constantly push the boundaries of conventional thinking. How do you know where the boundary is if you don't see failure now? So folks that say they push the boundaries all the time, never fail, we view it as an untrained partner. So we keep that barrel around there to make ourselves look back every so often, and if we don't see a failure, question, are we pushing it far enough? And when we do have an occasional failure, like last spring, we can look at it as it's all part of the process. It means we're doing the right thing. So it remains here for that reason. And I'll tell you ahead of time, Brian's already said there's not enough liability insurance in the world to let anybody else taste it. Yeah, only $80,000. Do we have that when you were here last?
Yes. He just got it.
Big room. Pump up here. What you pump, the guys will fill the barrel up and do it by hand, wear face shield, glove, keep your body, okay? Saturate yourself and get sick. You definitely don't want any problems. It takes them about 2.5 to 3 minutes to finish the barrels. What you notice is you get the barrel standing upright. What's unique for us, we have an additional hole drilled at the top. And that came about when Brian came here 6.5 years ago. He did a concept. You see where the paints were up on the wall over there, the barrels just get filled on the floor. They have to take them off the pallet, roll them over there, get the bum up, fill it. Bung it, stand it back up, put it back on the pallet. We found at the time that we would do 3 barrels on the floor, we would do 9 on the pallet. So any productivity gains which you get without affecting the quality of the product, we're going to go with it. In fact, we recently changed the cooperages that are making our barrels. They told us on the side here, they like it so much. They're building the whole free for us, and they're charging everybody else. Full barrel is going to be about 515 pounds. Yeah, we're not going to show you that momentarily. You're about 2 or 3 minutes ahead of you, but keep that. The reason the productivity gain is really important to us is because even though we are by far the largest bourbon producer on the East Coast, we are only at 15 people with 7 cars. Well, that's what we dumped the bourbon when we do the small batch. This came down to the original distillery in Fairfax County. So Jimmy will take, like I said, between 9 and 12 barrels, and they'll go on top of these little rollers here. There's actually that handle over there because it's pneumatic. It's like a gas station lift. There's a pump right over, compressor over there, and you just pull the handle and lift the barrels up. So Jimmy, when they're on the side, can spin them pretty much with one hand. The way he does it, you can use like a complicated corkscrew type of thing, or you can just use something heavy and can't roll on both sides of the bung and know where to hit it, and that will force the bung out. Out comes the bung, but also comes out a lot of bourbon, all the bourbon, or most of it anyway, and a whole bunch of char. Passes around so no one falls in the pit trying to see what it smells or looks like. After sitting, the alcohol sitting in there for up to 10 years, 10, 12 years, sometimes you get a lot of char breakers. Now the fun thing about the char is you sell it downstairs, and the fun thing to say is it's mandated potpourri. But in reality, you're going to smoke beef with it. Instead of using hickory, you can use the white oak and the bourbon flavors get infused with your different techniques. All right, so the bourbon's going to come down, go into the trough down below there. We have a stainless steel tank down the end there with a pump. We pump it back up through here and back out into the distillery. As we were coming in through the lab, we may have noticed the tank off to the side here that has foam on the outside of it. That's because we chill filter our bourbons. We'll drop them down for all of our spirits. We'll drop down 28 degrees, run through a filter. The reason being is when you distill with certain fatty acids that are suspended in there. And if you don't chill filter, it's below 94 proof. If you drop the temperature down too low, you get flocking. With flocking and brown spirits generally present itself as like a cream juice flowing through there. And the clear spirits, you're usually going to get small flakes that look like the flakes you see in the snow filter, not as many, but that's what the flakes are floating around here. You can sometimes have it bourbon. So we chill filter for that reason. A lot of controversy out there with the bourbon piece and whether you should chill filter or not chill filter. Well, they chill filter scotches too. And they actually did a study over there with 100 supposedly experienced Scotch drinkers. I had to sit down and trying to consistently tell the difference between chill filter and non-chill filter. What they found through that study was there's only 5 out of 100 can do it. Unless your palate's in the top 5% in the world, I know mine is, you never know the difference. Now, I mentioned below 94, our John Jay is 100. And I asked Brian Cooper, our master distiller, you're the big guy in productivity, why are we taking all the time to filter it if you don't have to? He said, well, he's tried it twice now, side by side, to convince himself that he wasn't just imagining. But because we do a light filtering, he feels that light filtering is taking out the flavors of the John that he doesn't enjoy, which makes the ones he does enjoy much more prevalent. So continue to chill filter. All right. Any other questions?
This is the spectrum analyzer I was telling you about.
Over there measures the different chemical compounds. Different chemical compounds will give you different flavor profiles. I forget sometimes when the toys get this big. Almost starts to feel like a clown car. So keep coming. All right, we stop here very briefly. See behind you here, I don't think we had this brand new chiller last time you were here. Here's our chiller here. When we're doing the chill filtering, it's going to run through there. The compressor outside. That's the tank to store it in. The foam on the outside because it's so cold, there'd be water all over the floor.
It's my favorite room. I love this smell.
Let's go around licking them. Barrel.
Thanks. That's the candy coming out of the barrel.
Candy, huh?
Yep.
They do get